Next up, we have Alan Wunsche. So Alan Wunsche is the chair and co-founder of Blockchain Canada. He is a finance technologist focused on new blockchain businesses and their disruptive impacts on blockchain on global wealth distribution and innovation. He brings hands-on technology experience as a finance and risk transformation executive at a global bank, management consulting and startups. For those of you who are Canadian and don't know Alan, now's the time to know him. You should know him by now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I don't see Tufi here, but delighted to be here. And yes, Tufi came out of the closet at a Blockchain Canada event a couple of years ago. I think I feel like I'm coming out of the AI closet at his event here. I have, sorry, do I have a clicker here? I have to ask somebody about, oh, there it is. It's on the ground. Okay. So I wanted to share a few thoughts with you about our experience and where we're headed. Blockchain Canada, for anyone that has not yet kind of come across us, we started with the specific mandate and the specific interest of ensuring that there's innovation in the blockchain space happening in Canada for the benefit of Canadians, for the benefit of Canadian competitiveness, and there's lots of work that many of us are doing in that respect. So if you're interested, get in touch with us. There's some really big questions to look at in this decentralized space. I think of it as this way, and you know, there is thanks to someone who had a slightly different quote here, but you know, the future is here. It's not quite decentralized yet. Where did we come from? And there's questions around, you know, where blockchain is taking us. And it does begin with big questions around what's the purpose of the firm. So Ronald Coase had this theory about transaction costs and the fact that there are large transaction costs that actually generate the nature of the firms, and these firms have evolved because it was very difficult to interact with other companies and other players, so it was easier to build all of that expertise in-house. Well, we've kind of evolved, and you look at a couple of the presenters this morning have already touched on these really important topics. Look, we had web number one that was essentially a decentralization of information. But as it became commercialized, Web 2 came to be. How did Web 2 come to be? Well, Web 2 came to be because there's some great firms that have provided super easy to use applications and services, but at the expense of our data, as we've heard, and they've become super centralized. So now we've got very centralized firms that have reduced the transaction cost and have provided some very great services, but at the expense of all of our data. So we have, you know, all of the usual suspects. And of course, as was said, I have had my share of consulting and capital markets experience. So I was at one of the big firms, big banks at the time of the crisis. There's some real structural concerns that people have, and they're legitimate with respect to all of the information and the web of financial engineering that was pretty obfuscated in the fact that you know, we had pretty fancy financial engineering, and it caused us some considerable issues with the last crisis that we had. And that, I won't go into that, but if you want to talk about that detail, I'd be happy to. I mean, we look at this, and those of us that think about the bigger problems that blockchain could be solving, we do come back to the data, the economics, human nature, but really we have an internet that many of us believe that is broken today, and it's back to what we had as our centralized evolution has happened in Web 2.0. And super recently, as a couple of days ago, actually it was yesterday, so Vitalik Buterin, who's the founder of Ethereum, put out a Medium post. And it's really interesting to hear this today in 2018 still. The fact that there's a growing crisis of confidence in established authorities, asking some really big questions. And does blockchain, something that he aspires to, does decentralization, something that he works towards, help that? We're clearly in this new decentralization phase of a Web3 and a new set of trust protocols that are coming our way. So that's exciting. I think we've got a lot of super exciting projects that have come out of what we'd call the tokenization of projects, and there's go to elementus.io to see the plethora of amazing projects that have come out. Now, this proves the fact that you can have a decentralized investment mechanism. And all these companies, largely speaking, would say they went to the public instead of having to go to traditional markets like Silicon Valley to get funded for their projects. This is really an aspect of decentralization happening on a global scale, where I can send some investment dollars into a project as easily as I can send email. Now this is transforming borders, and this is really going across national boundaries, and as you can see, it's on the right-hand side of that diagram. It's happening all over the place. So, Tufi asked for a little insight into what's going on in governments, banks, and blockchain. We had a great panel, actually, about the governance and what's happening. Largely speaking, the banks, although they would be considered a player in what is the traditional incumbent model, and we have a competitive monetary system that has arisen in the spirit of Bitcoin, Ethereum, and all of these other blockchains that are coming out. I think it's pretty obvious that the banks also see that this technology is something that they need to play in and are about to be playing in. For those of you interested, I mean, if you're in the financial services sector day to day, take a look at this very seriously, because there are business cases out there that really articulate, 50% job impact in anyone that's in financial services today based on blockchain and AI, and these big banks and the investment banks really understand that. Time is really close. I've got basically hardly any time left, actually, according to the monitor. How will this evolve? So I think of it on a couple of levels: centralization, decentralization, regulated, unregulated. So current players today, we have all of the regulated, centralized capital markets. We've moved to digital currency-based capital markets like the GDAX version. Now Binance has come out of nowhere, and they're the largest centralized. Today they're centralized, but they're moving into a decentralized model where you can basically play in the capital markets. And in this new capital market space, how is that going to be regulated? These are really big questions that the governments and regulators are asking themselves. And at the end of the day, we've got really, really big socioeconomic questions ahead of us. For example, what is the future of banking and finance? Do big corporations really need to exist, especially if they're profiting off the data that we own? And what is the future of privacy and liberty, really, when our personal data is being used without our consent and without our knowledge? So, these are big questions that we seek to tackle at Blockchain Canada, and working with government to really understand what the future of governments are. Because as soon as you speak to someone in our elected government leadership, they understand that what we have today is the power over monetary policy, the power over taxation, and you hear the word power. That the current structure we have works for us, but decentralization is seeking to take some of that power away from our incumbents, and we really need to think carefully and thoughtfully about how this is going to evolve. So I encourage all of you to get very familiar with these topics and to be part of the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Before Alan leaves, and instead of going through questions, which you can find him later, but there's something that he showed here which is quite interesting. I'm not sure if a lot of people noticed.
This was in the Genesis block, you mean?
Yes, let me see yours. Okay. Okay, this picture here is extremely important because a lot of folks, they would think that we're just obsessed about decentralization for the sake of it's like a coup d'etat or something like that. The intent here is to centralize around the user, and that's what decentralization is. User-centric is turning each and every user of what they deserve. You're a human, you're entitled to vote, you're entitled to have a lot of things around you. And the stuff that Alan is working in the blockchain goes a lot beyond just Blockchain Canada. He's got something that is called the Token Funder. I asked him specifically not to talk about that one, which you can find out later, because mainly with ACM, it's a not-for-profit foundation, and we're trying to get folks to talk about the mission, the ideology, and what we're trying to accomplish here, which is decentralized governance brought into AI. Alan has seen how centralized governance can be attacked from within, whether it is banks, whether it is government, whether it is, and I'm not talking about, you know, the world that we live in here, yet, although we don't necessarily see perfect governments, but 70% of the world, they live in places where they cannot trust their governments. So putting things like AI in the hands of those governments and saying it's like, hey, it's secured, it's sitting behind a certain firewall or whatnot, it's actually insecure because the people that they're going to be controlled by that are the ones on the ground, and the ones that are attacking it, they're the ones sitting behind the firewall. So it's extremely important to bring this to the rest of the world and this awareness early on to ensure that the future of humanity is liberated and not enslaved. Once again, please help me say thank you to Alan Wunsche.